Dr. Boyd serves as President and Chief Learning Officer of MaxLife Incorporated and is President of Vertical City Incorporated. She has over 18 years of professional experience in creating dynamic learning environments for youth, children, and adults through customized sessions, programs, and certifications. Her life vision is to live a full life that brings about true significance and lasting change to help others do the same. Dr. Boyd has worked with school districts, city government, churches, healthcare entities, nonprofits, businesses, and community organizations. That is quite a mouthful. She does quite a bit. She specializes in coaching, team building, strategic planning and leadership, and organizational development. And early in her career, I'd like to note, early in her leadership journey, she was invited to a White House coffee by former President Clinton, along with 14 other leaders across the country, to discuss issues impacting the country. Dr. Boyd's educational experience includes a bachelor's in international relations from Spelman College, a master's in leadership from Bellevue University, a master's in human and organizational systems, and a PhD in human and organizational systems from Fielding Graduate University. She has obtained several certifications and training credentials. She is a professionally trained coach, certified personality trainer, certified leadership awareness facilitator, certified emotional health consultant, advanced certified life plan facilitator, and certified strategic planner. She is an Institute for Social Innovation Fellow with Fielding, and she and her husband, Damien Sr., of 16 years, live in Metro Atlanta, Georgia, and are proud parents to their gifted teenage son, Damien Jr., who has complex medical conditions. She thoroughly enjoys popcorn, antiquing, thrifting, and presidential matters. And you know, I got nothing else to say outside of the fact that I've heard this incredible presenter speak, and I'm excited to have you here today, Dr. Boyd. It is my pleasure, and thank you so much for sharing your time. I'm going to mute myself, and let's go ahead and get started. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Hillary. You are an amazing, just dynamic person. I mean, in the little bit that I've had an opportunity to know you, you light up whoever, any environment, any person that you come across. So it's just a delight to get to know you and to be a part of this webinar series. I am Zarat Yemisia Boyd. An easy way to remember my name is Zarat, like Carrot Diamond or Carrot Gold, whichever you prefer. I say that because a part of just my own journey has been one of appreciating and embracing my own uniqueness. I'm half Nigerian, truly a Nigerian American, and I just am delighted to share a little bit of my own journey around rest and renewal, as well as my professional expertise, if you will, on this particular topic. It is one of my favorite topics because it comes out of great pain, great journey, great issue. And so I hope that today will be a joy for you as you reflect on rest and renewal and how it impacts your life today. So a few additional things about me. I have been on this journey of rest and renewal for intentionally, and I say that very specifically because sometimes our journey, we're unaware of some of the things that we really need to take notice of. And so it wasn't until a pretty major health scare for me that I woke up to this question and to this wrestle around rest and renewal. And it was a really important wake-up call. I remember talking to the cardiologist and he was just baffled. He was like, "Why are you in my office having these issues that you're having?" And it was because I was living a purposeful life. I was living a driven life, a very determined life, but at the core of it, I would say a very reckless life, not paying attention to the sirens that were going off in my body and paying attention to appreciating some of the less visible things, some of the things that matter the most. And so for the last 19 years, I've been exploring, unpacking, this idea, this practice of rest and renewal. The beautiful thing about rest and renewal is kind of the same thing like eating. You can't just talk about it. You actually have to practice it in a way that brings life and brings wholeness. And so I've been on this journey for 19 years. And out of that, as I mentioned, talking with this cardiologist and running ragged, I am a recovering workaholic. I am Zarat, Yemisia Boyd. And I say that as a part of my story because in my bones is this drive to do. And I don't believe there's anything wrong with that drive to do. But when our human doing becomes more than our human being, then I think we may find ourselves in a pretty significant whirlwind. And so I'm still, I would say recovering because I have to be mindful from season to season and project to project and opportunity to opportunity to understand my own tendencies of workaholism. So I'm a recovering workaholic. Also, out of this kind of awakening 19 years ago, I finally committed about 16 years ago to a consistent rest day. And for me, that was the difference maker. When I was able to say, everything will be okay, everyone will be okay. I do not have to work at all times every day of the week, and I can sit and enjoy the beauties of this life. That was the difference maker for me. And I've been on that journey in all of the different seasons of my life of owning different organizations and helping to found different organizations and caring for our son who is medically fragile. Being able to honor that gift of rest for me has been a delight. And then the last thing I want to share about my own rest and renewal profile is that I am truly committed to igniting a revolution around rest. If you think about it in your own lives, as we look around us in our communities, on the news, we are hurried people. We're busy people. And sometimes at the end of the day, and even for those who come to the end of their life, they're like, did it all matter? Because some of the things that really, truly mattered was lost in the midst of the rat race, as some of us may call it. And so I want to see a revolution around rest and renewal. And I say that so sincerely, just because I believe that we can, as Hillary shared my life vision, to live a full life and not one that is consumed by some of the things that can easily dominate our lives, and not spend time with others or spend time getting to know ourselves in a more meaningful way. So a couple of things that have impacted this journey for me. I remember growing up, I lived on Retreat Road, and the street that was next to us was Quiet Way. And it was fascinating because it wasn't until a couple of years ago that I even realized that I was being reminded every time I wrote my address, every time I shared with someone where I lived, of this reminder of retreating and resting and renewing and being quiet. And so I just appreciate the fact that there's clues all around us. There's clues all in our journey of this life to rest and renew. And one of the traumatic moments came from our son's birth. Our son, Damien Jr., is an amazing young man now. He's almost 13, hilarious, contagious, full of joy. But at birth, he experienced a global brain injury, one in which had us in the hospital for 4 weeks, where he wasn't able to eat on his own, breathe on his own, regulate his own temperature. He was in a very scary position. Either he was going to die in the hospital or he was going to be in an institution. And that was our reality. And the picture that you see, for those who are able to view the presentation, the picture that you see is on the final day as we were literally leaving the hospital, which many were shocked that we were even leaving the time that we actually were able to leave the hospital because of just the state that he was in. and the fact that we had to face this new normal. And so sometimes we feel that in our lives, this idea of rest and renewal is kind of like Jello. Like if you're trying to hold a big glob of Jello and you just can't get your arms around it. And I realized in this experience of raising an individual who is medically fragile, he's in a wheelchair, he's fully dependent on us, he needs the highest level of care and attention, that even in some of the most devastating experiences of our lives, that we can still find rest and renewal, and we can find that new normal that allows us to experience the richness of this life. One of the other turning points for me that I'll share during this webinar is out of the journey of obtaining my PhD. I sometimes you wonder, okay, are you losing it? Are you kind of insane to embark on this journey? And I remember the last year when I was completing my dissertation and final work, our son needed to have hip surgery. He was in a full body cast, and you think about it, someone who already has an extreme level of care, really 24/7 type of care, now in a full body cast. And I just remember I had to take about 4 months off in my final year. And I just am so appreciative of my dissertation chair, my mentor, who was like, okay, you are not going to make it. We need to make sure that you wrap this up. And I just remember just the burn, the energy that I did not have to finish the journey. And so once I finished a couple of years ago, I was beyond exhausted. And I embarked on, my husband will say a full year, I say 10 months, but for him, it was a full year of recovery just to be okay. And at the time, I had embedded this rhythm of daily times of silence and solitude. We had embarked on, as I mentioned, a weekly time of rest. We had also integrated quarterly getaways. My husband and I, we also had started doing annual sabbaticals where we disconnect from the work that we were involved in to rest and renew. But I needed something so much beyond even that rhythm. And so I learned during that season, that year, where my goal, and I'm a very ambitious person, I have many goals and desires as I live this life, but my goal was rest. And it was so awkward at times where it's like, okay, you almost put it on the timetable where it's like, okay, I got 3 weeks to rest and I'll be okay again, right? And I wasn't. And I just had to leave it open-ended, where this beauty of an extended break, giving myself that gift, was so restorative. And I realized in all of the anxiety of, okay, is everybody going to be okay? And is our son going to be okay? Everything was fine. Everything wasn't perfect, but everything was fine. And in those two experiences, our son's traumatic birth and caring for him all these years, and the recovery process out of the PhD, were two bedrocks, two pillars in this idea of rest and renewal, and even my own journey of rest and renewal. So when I'm talking, it isn't just this theoretical stuff and this is what you should do and shouldn't do, but it comes also out of this cry, this wrestle to experience greater richness in this life, and not just being a human doing, but also being a human being first and foremost. And so for all of us, there are different battles that we face. I shared a little bit of my battles for gaining restful rhythms. Again, restful rhythms. So it isn't just, okay, I'm going to rest this one day on this 1 hour or this vacation part of this 1 year, but how do you continually embed rhythms of rest and renewal, where it's a process, it's an ongoing process of awakening. I share with you kind of some of the moments where I awakened to, I can't live like this. I can't keep doing my life like this, to this process of restoring and this process of rejuvenating yourself. And I just believe in it, even in my own journey, that it's not just this dream that you can do once you leave this earth or at the end of this earth or once you retire or kind of this future, but it can be experienced at each stage of your life. And I wrote something. My goal during this time is to challenge you to eliminate as many excuses for you to rest and renew, and to choose more restful rhythms, even in the greatest fight of your lives. So that fight may be PhD work. That fight may be some other level of education. That fight may be a family situation. That fight may be your workplace. That fight may actually be you. But knowing that you can experience just a greater richness of life. So I'm going to share a couple of areas in which people battle. And so as I do that, I want you to think about some of your own battles. And if any of these kind of fit you in this season of life, and if there's one, it's like, those don't really fit me, I have about 2 or 3 others, I want you to jot those down as well, because it's important to identify the battles that we face so we can actually face them. It's interesting that, if you were in a fight and it was total darkness and you don't know where the licks are coming from, the hits are coming from, but when you turn on that light and you actually see what you're facing, you have a better chance of addressing the attack than if you're just in a fog or in darkness, trying to fight something that you can't truly see. And so one battle that I find that people face is guilt. This whole idea is, I don't deserve to rest. For whatever reason, I remember when our son experienced this global brain injury, before this moment, everything was perfect. And I'll say it that way. Everything was perfect. There were no issues. We did all of our testing. We got to the hospital in the time that we needed to. Actually had an emergency C-section. He was born blue. They had to resuscitate him 40 seconds. And all this time, I'm like, why is everyone crying? I didn't know that he experienced this. And so when it finally hit me that our son experienced all of this, and he experienced it as a result of being in my womb, I was just distraught. To be just very frank, I was very distraught. And I wanted to be found guilty, because there was no other excuse, no other reason. The doctors were like, we don't know why he wasn't getting the oxygen that he was getting. There wasn't a cord wrapping around his neck. Placenta was fine, all that good stuff. And I just wanted to be found guilty. And I remember through a series of discussions with the doctor, and I was just so gracious, so grateful that her responses, sometimes doctors don't know the reasons why. You did everything that you needed to do. And I appreciate those words, and they stick with me even now, because I know if I would care for our son from a place of guilt, I wouldn't rest. Because I would continually I wouldn't allow anyone else to touch him, quote unquote. I would try to be the Lone Ranger. And I realized even in that moment, almost 13 years ago, that guilt could rob you of the beauty and the gift of rest and renewal. Another that I shared is workaholism, and there's other addictions like workaholism. Another is unspoken and unrealistic expectations, unspoken and unrealistic expectations. And that sometimes is of ourselves, and it's sometimes of other people. It's like, I need to do this. I need to stay up for 15 hours because my boss is expecting X, Y, and Z. Maybe they even told you. But there's some negotiations there, and their expectations, and a lot of my training need to be agreed upon. Even though it's spoken doesn't mean that it's agreed upon. I remember one of my former bosses' friends would always joke, and they're like, you actually told him no. No, you're not going to work on your rest day. But that was something that I was able to work through and emerge as a growth area for my own life, because I knew the need for rest and renewal. Another battle that we face is this this issue of impatience. It's like, let me just get it done. Let me just stay up another hour. Let me just stay up all through the night. This idea that it just has to get done. And I realized there are some things that do need to get done. Payroll needs to happen. So, you say, I'll deal with payroll if you're a business owner and you manage payroll. You need to handle that. But there's some things that can wait. Lack of collaboration is one that I find, and this is ideas. I'm the only one who can, ... And I find that unless you train, cross-train, delegate in a meaningful and productive way, this idea of collaboration robs us, if we don't do it well, robs us of opportunities for rest and renewal. And another that I find that we all face is just poor planning. It's like, man, I knew I needed to schedule that day off. I knew I needed to schedule some time at the gym. But for whatever reason, because of the hecticness of life, I just don't plan for it. And so in order to have a plan, you got to actually work that plan. And I just find that sometimes we just don't do it well. And so those are some of the battles that we all face. And I want you to jot down if one of those battles that I shared resonates with you. If there's something else, you're like, Zarat, that's not my list. I have another list. I want you to identify your list so that you can actually face it, so you can determine what are the ways in which to move forward. So when I think about rest and renewal, I think about rhythms. And you think about in music. Our son is like Stevie Wonder in the making. He's a fabulous musician. He has a beautiful ear for music. And even though he is what he most would call nonverbal, he experiences such life and such joy through music. And so when you think about music, there's this rhythm, this pattern of beats and sounds that makes music so beautiful. And even if you're not a musician, you don't have a technical ear, when something's off. And so I like to think of rest and renewal in terms of rhythms, where I'm not trying to look at perfection in the sense of balance and things need to be equally, because sometimes that just doesn't work. Sometimes you need to hold out on a note longer than another note. You need to rest and don't say anything. And so when you think about rhythms, think about music and some of the most beautiful music that you enjoy listening to and kind of how that rhythm moves you. And so when I think about rest and renewal, I think about movement and I think about rhythm. And it's important to view rest and renewal that way because it allows you to navigate the ebbs and flows of life. Any moment we could be in the hospital. The other day, our son experienced some medical issues at school. And so at any moment, things can disrupt what you may have planned. But if you have a good rhythm, it can help sustain you the long haul. So some of the theoretical framework around this idea of rhythms, the 7 rhythms of rest and renewal, come from a resource that I truly enjoy. I found it in my journey at Fielding, and it's around holistic learning. And there's several other resources around transformational learning or whole person development or holistic learning. And this one really just resonated with me. And it talked about how do you nurture the development of the whole person. And when you think about rhythms of rest and renewal, and I'll share the 7 that I've identified, it speaks to the whole person. So it isn't just kind of one area, but how comprehensive can you be? How holistic can you be? How can you approach rest and renewal from a systems thinking perspective? And so it's just a great resource. I encourage you, if you want to continue to learn more about kind of holistic learning, feel free to delve into that research. And so based on whole person development and holistic learning, these 7 rhythms are some that I've identified, and I'll share them here, and then I'll go into each one in greater depth. The first is intrapersonal, and that's you. That's you appreciating you. Another is emotional. Another is mental. It's a mental rhythm, spiritual rhythm, physical rhythm. Visual is one that I really like because we forget about that particular rhythm. And then relational rhythm, how you engage with those that are around you. So intrapersonal rhythm. This is the idea of focusing on how you richly care and appreciate yourself. I talk and engage with a number of leaders, and I find that I think we've done maybe a disservice to how we develop people, where we develop people based on a role. You know, are you an organizational leader, or you're an engineer, or you are a particular role? But we fail to help people truly get in touch with who they are as a person, their personhood, their character, their human being, if you will. And I find that when we don't focus on caring for and appreciating ourselves, then we literally are moved by whatever role or other identity that we may have attached ourselves to. And there's nothing wrong with the roles that we have in this life. There's nothing wrong with different identities that we appreciate. But who are you just naked? Not specifically, but just naked. You as a person, you as, for me, Zarat Yemisi, a boy, who am I? Just as Zarat and Hillary and others that are on the call, who are you? And truly appreciating and caring for that particular person, not Zarat as mom and Zarat as wife and Zarat as business owner and Zarat as founder and Zarat as entrepreneur and PhD and all of these different beautiful roles that we have. But Zarat, who am I? What does my name mean? And how am I just as a person? And getting in touch with that person more specifically. And I find that this is one of the harder areas that people face, because they navigate. And if, let's say, you know, I've had friends, especially, you know, in the medical community and caring for someone who's medically fragile, a lot of our son's friends have passed away, and they've passed away at a very young age. And at that time, the parent is lost, because for so long they found their full identity in being a parent. And there's nothing wrong with that particular identity. But if something happens to that, if I no longer am a business owner, then do I lose the essence of who I am? And so this rich care and appreciation of self, I know as I work with different leaders, I give them a questionnaire, 100-question questionnaire. And can you answer all of these questions about yourself? Like, if you had to draw a picture of yourself and all of the intricacies, could you do that? If you had to give a detailed description of your physical state, could you do that? Could you give a full description of your gifts and the talents and abilities? Could you do that? I remember I was just talking with someone and I asked them about their personality, and they were like, "Oh, I took that test. I don't remember what it was." And I think there's more learning. I think we are to be a student of us. I find that too often we're a student of maybe our mentor. We're a student of, maybe if you're in the educational realm, your professor or of your boss or of your parent, but we have failed to be a student of ourselves. And I think there's so much beauty and so much learning that emerge from this interpersonal rhythm. Another rhythm that's important is the emotional rhythm, and it's the awareness of one's iceberg. The awareness of one's iceberg. So you think about Titanic, the famous movie that some cry on, and you think about the issue with the Titanic sinking wasn't necessarily the ice on the surface above the water. It was that big old chunk of ice that was underneath the water that shipwrecked the Titanic. That big ship that no one thought could ever sunk because of what was underneath the surface, what was in that iceberg. And I find also, just in the franticness of life, sometimes we just are not in tune. We're not aware of our emotions. What makes us sad? What makes us happy? What makes us mad? What makes us angry? What makes us invigorated? What really are our emotions, especially at a particular season of life? I remember just recently there was a time when I just asked the question to myself, why am I angry? I had gone through kind of a series of some battles at our son's school because we really emphasize inclusion and making sure that the view of our son is one that is beautiful and not one that's based on a diagnosis, not one that's based on someone else's perspective on his outcome and who he is and what he's able to do, but one that's based on promise and hope. And I just remember, I was like, why am I angry? And my husband was asked, he was like, why are you up for a fight? It was like Mama Bear was coming out for anything. It was like you dropped something on the floor, Mama Bear was out. I mean, it was like, what's going on? And I had to pause. I had to think, okay, what's really going on? What's kind of my responses are just a symptom of what's happening in a greater way. And when I think about rest and renewal, it's hard to rest when you are full of anxiety, or you're full of this kind of this pulsating thing that you can't really process. And I truly believe that unprocessed emotions do not die. They just get buried. And they are still alive and well and wreaking havoc in our lives in ways that sometimes we don't even realize. And so being aware of one's own emotional kind of state and well-being is powerful when it comes to rest and renewal, and it actually can get you to a greater place of rest and renewal as you manage and navigate that well. Another rhythm that I appreciate is the spiritual rhythm. And it's this idea of intimacy and community. And we all have different ways in which we engage the spiritual life that we have and have access to. I remember being in Saudi Arabia. My dad worked in Saudi Arabia for 18 years. He was an engineer there and helped in Riyadh and for many years, helping with their medical infrastructure. And I remember the times as a strict Muslim country where you had no choice but to stop. I remember we would be in stores or restaurants and things would close down. I remember on certain days of the week, you would not have access. And so this idea of stopping to rest and renew was powerful. And that impacted me even in my own journey. The part of me why I want to take time to commit to a rest day every week, where for 24 hours I disengage from this rugged race, or this race of working and doing, to just delight and appreciate the beautiful things of this life, my family, and delighting in things. And so this idea of rest, weekly rest, speaks to the spiritual side, because I realize when I do that, then I'm saying that I'm not in control. I'm not in control of this world. I'm not in control of everything, and everything will be fine. The world can run without Zarat having to do all the time. And so that impacted my spiritual rhythm. So this idea of intimacy and communion, how do you do that in your own life in a meaningful way? Also, when I think about the spiritual rhythm, one of the things that I've been working on is the beauty of silence in solitude. And so instead of just my times that I take 10 minutes, 5 minutes in the car, in the bathroom, before I come in to just be silent, I was like, let me just take it a step further. And so I did my first silent retreat, meaning I went for, I believe it was 2 days, to a monastery. And I was like, hey, they do it best. They were one of the folks that do it best, silence. And I went away and I was silent the whole time. And I will say it was quite awkward for much of that time, but just the beauty of listening. You pay attention to so many other things than you always talking. And that has also increased my own intimacy and community ability and discipline. Another rhythm that is important, we hear about it with all the Zumba and all the CrossFit and all the interesting things out there around your physicality. So this physical rhythm, what you're doing to care and restore your body. And one thing that I find that sometimes we overlook is that preventative care. So sometimes we wait till we are in the hospital or about to go to the hospital to pay attention to our bodies. And I believe that there is so much more that we can gain if we are more preventative or more proactive. And so I just ask, have you gotten your checkups? There's a couple of checkups I need to schedule even myself. I remember when I emerged out of the PhD process, I actually got a physical, and I realized that I hadn't gotten my teeth cleaned for like 3 years. And it was weird. I was like, really? I was just shocked as I was talking to the technician as she was cleaning. She was like, yeah, Miss Zarat, it's been 3 years. And so paying attention, making sure you're doing those checkups, because it can prevent some things that you might face later on. So care and restore your body. And how are you doing today in your physical rhythm? Another rhythm that I think most of us that are on the call appreciate and engage in pretty often, or you probably wouldn't be on this call, is the mental rhythm. This idea of how you are transforming your mind. As I shared, our son had a brain injury, and I'm very fascinated with neuroscience and how your brain heals. And one of my nicknames just growing up at different seasons with different groups of people, they call me the brain. And so I love thinking, I love learning, I love processing. Even while I was at Fielding, I created a learning process that extended beyond just the lifelong learning concepts that we generally find. And I called it matrix learning. So I appreciate this idea of this mental rhythm. But how is that learning transforming your life? How is that learning transforming your mind and how you think? Is it, it's so interesting. You talk to doctors, and I'll use them as a group or as an example, where they're telling you all this good stuff. They've gone to school for a very long time, but they may choose to smoke. And they may be telling you, hey, you need to keep your lungs clear and all this stuff. And it's like, you're not really applying this idea of wellness and wholeness. And not that they can't smoke, but I'm just saying there's a disconnect between all of this learning and actually applying and allowing that learning to impact your everyday life. And so however you learn and the ways in which you learn formally and informally, actually transforming your own mind. The sixth rhythm that I'll share is the visual rhythm. And this is one that sometimes we don't always think about in terms of rest and renewal. There's times when I live in Atlanta. I love going to the West Coast. And part of that because it's just the environment, what I see, the coastline, just immediately, I could have had the worst week ever. But when I see visually the beauty of creation, the beauty of the surroundings, I literally am invigorated. And so what creates that awe? Those moments of awe, those moments of splendor, those moments of delight in your surroundings. I remember also, I was having a really tough day, and I was talking with my husband. We were driving down the street, and for some reason, I just honed in on this ant. There was an ant on our dashboard, on our window. And it was fascinating because, normally I would not pay any kind of attention to an ant, as small as it is. But for some reason, I honed on to this ant, and this ant was dancing in my perspective. And for some reason, that ant dancing totally changed my perspective, totally changed my outlook. It didn't necessarily change the situation that I was facing, but it changed how I was viewing it. And so this visual rhythm, this being in awe and appreciating, being aware of your surroundings and the detail of your surroundings and being in places and spaces that bring you to life is so important in our everyday lives. And so I just encourage you to find what are some of the things that bring such great joy and great delight when you see them. It could be surroundings, it could be tangible things, it could be people, but to find what is your rhythm visually that brings delight and awe. And then the seventh rhythm is the relational rhythm. And this is for those who are both introverts and extroverts. So it doesn't necessarily speak to how much time you need to be with people, because some people recharge when they're by themselves. Some people recharge when they're with folks. So I'm not talking about that per se, but being in rich connection with others. So if it is just one or two people that you find great joy in being around, or if it's large groups of people or somewhere in between, just finding that rhythm relationally where you can rest, you can be yourself, you can renew because of the level of engagement. We have a number of couples. One of the things that I did not mention is my husband and I, we founded a church in one of the toughest parts of the city of Atlanta. And so we're doing some pretty significant community development work that is hard. It is not for the faint at heart. And so we find ourselves in need of connection with other couples, sometimes couples that not even in Atlanta, to engage in this relational aspect of rest and renewal. And also I find that this community can actually help you rest and renew. As I shared, we have a pretty extensive need for rest and renewal. And we also have been able to create a community so that my husband and I can go away and engage in couple play without our son there. And people are like, how could you guys do that? How can you leave your son, or how can you get away? We've made it a priority because we know if we're not good, if we're not at least at 70% or 80%, our son he's toast. It is not going to work out for him. It's not going to be good for him if we're operating on 20% or 30% or 10% or even 40%. And so even next week, we already have set up our quarterly getaway where we're famous at staycations, where we just get away. And so our community, our relational community, allows us to do that in a way that's meaningful. So how is your connection with others? Is it rich? Is it unstable? Is it like, man, there's some people that I need to be close to, but I'm distant because of the engagement and some of the other things? I just ask that you think about how can you develop that rhythm, that relational rhythm in your life. And so we talked about 7 rhythms: intrapersonal, the mental rhythm, the visual rhythm, the spiritual, emotional rhythm, the physical rhythm, and the relational rhythm. And so I ask that you would identify at least one action, something that you're like, okay, Zarat, I know I can't focus on all of this, but there's one thing that I can do in the next 30 days that will be meaningful, that will help create this rhythm, this beautiful melody, this beautiful sync towards rest and renewal. I know for me, one of the things I was working on just recently and was able to schedule it a couple of weeks back was a personal day. And so, I have the daily time of silence and solitude. I have the weekly down, I have the quarterly, I have the annually, as we disconnect for a month for a sabbatical time. But I knew I needed to embed some personal days where, hey, I'm not sick, I don't got to go to the doctor. It's not necessarily my normal rest day, but just for me to do as I desire. And so that was one action that I'm very happy that I was able to start, and I want to continue. And so we're all in process. This all is a journey. It's not one thing or the other. It's like, how do you build kind of this synergy, this cycle, this rhythm of rest and renewal? So what is your one action as you think about the 7 rhythms of rest and renewal? So I'm going to pause here. I believe Hillary is going to come on and navigate any questions just because of the time that we have. Would love to hear some of your ponderings and questions regarding rest and renewal.
Zarat, I feel like you have been talking to me the entire time. It's such a pleasure to hear all of this, but I quite honestly, as I'm listening to you, and I've been taking notes myself here, is everything that you have laid out makes just such incredible sense. And so I thank you for this. And I do have my notes written down for my personal things, and I'll share that with you at another time.
Sure.
But I do have a couple of questions I'd like to ask you,
Sure.
which may be in a bit of an aside to your presentation, but thinking about those that will be seeing this video maybe a little bit later that weren't able to join us today. As you were speaking, I did get a couple of emails of people saying, I can't get on, but I want to watch later.
Okay.
But with that said, because I know students are interested in this too, and your experience as a student, and thank you for bringing that in. So the first question I have is, can you talk about your dissertation research and how it relates to your work today?
Right. So my dissertation research, so when I was talking about some of the rest and renewal and learning, that wasn't specific to my dissertation, but my dissertation research focused on the work that we do in the community. So the title was Experiences in Contemporary Church Planting. So that's basically this field of research around entrepreneurship and how new churches start. Because for me, we were right in the thick. Our church just celebrated 5 years a couple of months ago. And for a church that it is in a depressed community, serving college students and those who have varied resources, that's just a miraculous thing. It's extremely, extremely tough. And so my dissertation research really examined, how do you navigate this world of starting something new and all of the nuances with it? How do you navigate the change process? How do you navigate the entrepreneurship aspects? And actually, a part of the study, especially in my literature review, talked about entrepreneurship and the leaders that are leading these new organizations and some of the rhythms and focus on well-being that's so important when you are starting something new, because clearly there's so many complexities and nuances that you will not know, regardless of how many years of experience you had previously, all of the education. Some of that is it doesn't necessarily go out the window, but when you're in the throes of things and you're starting something from scratch, it takes a level of resilience. And it was one of the topics that came up, is how do you create resiliency over time? How do you gain sustainability over time? So the research study actually examined a couple of examples that have started new churches and highlighted that, as well as highlighted organizational leaders that work with these entities. And so it was fascinating for me that I was experiencing doing it, if you will, while studying it. And it actually helped frame some of the things around collaboration and help frame things around well-being, because too often it's like we will kill ourselves, not intentionally, but we will damage ourselves in such a way, especially when you start something new, that leaves it taints the actual beauty of starting the thing, that you lose the essence of the people that are starting it or the leaders that are starting it. So it's really fascinating as I navigated that dissertation work that this idea of rest and renewal emerged out, not directly, but almost indirectly.
Thank you. And I did have a follow-up question, but I just got a comment here from Gayla. Gayla, thank you so much for your kind words. And she has a question here. Do you think that the majority of people have to experience some low or some crisis before we step back and take care of ourselves?
I would say, unfortunately, sometimes we only awaken to something in crisis. And one of the things that I've been trying to encourage people is the proactive side, because sometimes crisis just come for us and we just have to navigate it. But I find if we're at a good place, then we can navigate that crisis well. Like I think about in kind of the electrical world, people talk about blackout. versus brownout. There's this whole kind of body of information around that, where blackout is, okay, you're at the hospital. You're not, there's nothing happening. But brownout is even more devastating because you're operating at 20%, but your output is much more than that. So you're actually over functioning and you're doing more with less, and actually is a worse state than blackout. Because blackout, you're in the hospital, you're going to have to rest. And brownout, and I just find that, hey, if we continually open those conversations and we continually be proactive, I think we don't have to wait until a crisis to emerge, because there's all these clues that are signaling off and sirens that are going off, that if we pay attention to them, I think we can be at a better place. And we don't have to have such a setback where, okay, because of the crisis and because maybe we didn't manage things before from a preparedness standpoint, you think about emergency preparedness and all of that, and it's like, okay, we're just doing disaster recovery. Hey, get that thing that you need, that extra food and those extra blankets, so you can actually manage the crisis better than saying, oh, well, we're just going to freeze to death and then we'll do better next time. Sometimes there isn't a next time. And sometimes the damage is so great that you lost hours or days or years because now you're just trying to get back to ground zero versus moving the ball forward.
Mm-hmm. Great. And I have one last question before we come up on the hour here. Actually, two, but second to last question. During your fielding, your journey at fielding, and kind of going back to your research, but also tying it to your current work now, was there any one point that you can think of off the top of your head that you had some type of aha moment? That you the work that you were doing on with your dissertation, you just went, aha, this is where I need to be going in my life. And if there's anything that kind of sticks out at that point, I'd love to hear about
Sure.
that.
I would say there was a couple of, I'll share one, and that was, I was focusing on human learning and motivation. And at the core, I do a lot of leadership and organizational change and organizational development, but at the core for me is learning. If I do all of that and someone doesn't learn or have an aha or transformational moment, it is truly, for me, it's a waste. For others, they're like, no, let's go, let's keep it moving. But for me, like at the core is learning. And so I remember when I was with David, Professor David, and we were journeying through literature around human learning. And I was reading information, and it was intersecting with how we're caring for our son and kind of different perspectives or lenses. Some people have the medical lens, some people have the more empowerment lens, and how that intersected with even the work that we do in the community. How do you bring dignity and wholeness to people and not project that what a community might need. And so all of these things kind of converged together as to the reason why I created what I call matrix learning, where it's lifelong learning, life deep learning, life wide learning, and life full learning. And it intersects kind of the formal education, and intersects also your life experience, because I think too often we don't actually bring into play our life experiences and the resiliency or the ability to overcome, the ability to face into the work that we do, and then the life full, this whole life purpose actualization. And so for me, the aha came out of really just pulling all of the, you talk about systems, all of these different systems and components together and frame my own perspective, or at least expand a perspective around learning to where it's more dynamic, it's more full, and actually the whole holistic whole person development emerged from that. But it was during my journey in that human learning and motivation that really kind of brought it all together, because I went into a deep dive into the literature around learning. And again, it also impacted my dissertation work.
That's fantastic. And that's actually a perfect lead into the last piece here that I would like to share for those that are still on the call is we are very fortunate to have Dr. Boyd as one of our alumni track presenters at summer session. And this year it is in Tucson, Arizona for the School of Leadership Studies. And the date that you are presenting is on Friday, July 14th. There it is. And really, really happy to thank you. Number one, thank you for today. Really appreciate your energy and your expertise and your time. And anytime, I'm glad I actually got to sit and listen to you. And I'm going to sneak into your class at summer session for sure. So I wanted to share that we get a little bit more of her and in face-to-face, and hopefully we'll be able to do a live Zoom on that. I'm still working on that. But I wanted to make sure that if people had more questions for you or wanted to find a little bit more about your organization, can you just share a good website for you? I don't know if you have one last slide that maybe shares.
Yeah, I'll go back to my first.
Yeah, that would be a great slide to end on. And for everybody who is on today, thank you so much for joining us. And excellent. All of our contact information is right there. And if anybody has any questions, any comments, alumnirelations@fielding.edu, I'm more than happy to answer those for you. And one last virtual hug and thank you so much for taking the time to share today, and look forward to seeing you in person soon in a couple of months.
Awesome. Thank you so much.